Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man for whom takeaway doesn't just mean Chinese food.
Tim Longo. Wow. Okay, yep, that was a good intro on the fly.
First time I've done that. Actually done a takeaway joke in our takeaways episode. This is the time of the year where we look back on the year that was, and the big surprise to me, looking at this a couple of days ago, because I was going to give Tim the list of episodes, I was like, oh wow, I was thinking we had like one interview this year, or maybe two, but they were all before the middle of June. And so I just didn't remember that we did so many, and a couple of those were for games that we played in 2023. Yeah. So it was like I just totally forgot that we had I mean, and it's an amazing list of guests besides, so it was kind of like I don't know how I forgot that, but being able to listen back to them mostly today was a real joy. So
yeah, it was I did a combo of yesterday and today, and I actually did miss one. Full caveat for today's episode, I didn't get time to listen to Sam Lake, but otherwise I listened to the others. And you sent me the list via episode numbers, and I was like, oh yeah, that's more numbers, that's more episodes than I thought it was going to be, but without the names, and I had forgotten basically all the who they were, and then I was like, oh wow, this is a good list of people.
Yeah,
it was a good year just through.
It was a good half year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was just through happens, because we never really know how especially because we now do them whenever we can get them, not just at the end. In fact, I predict this year, 2025, we will also have the same thing happen, because there's some kind of percolating in the background that are not from, will not be from 2025. So we'll have it happen again. So we get them when we can at this point. We're just happy to have them at any point. Yeah. But yeah, we lucked out.
Yeah. And it's a real joy to do them, and these, these are all names, I'll go ahead and read them. Well, Tony Rowe is the only one who was unknown to me, and that was a personal connection of yours, and that's our Trespasser QA expert, which was an interesting conversation to listen back on, because how do you QA that game? But aside from Tony, we also have Jordan Mechner, Michel Ancel, Alex Garden, and Sam Lake, and I'm like, how did we get to talk to those four people this past year? That's crazy. So crazy good. Great list. So it's as we say every year, it's a real joy in the podcast to just be able to have a conversation with some of these folks, especially right after we played one of their games, or in Jordan's case, multiple of his games, and to get that opportunity to pick their brain while it's still fresh in our minds, even though it might not be immediately fresh in theirs. They lived it, so they do have some memory of it pretty well, of what that was like, especially sometimes the challenges, or the revelations, or whatever, the good stuff. So it's a lot of fun. So it's always it always makes me reflect on my own journey as a creator, and what I, looking back, what I would take away from things I've done if somebody were to do this with me. So it's fun from that perspective too.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just through the randomness of the universe, it makes, and then I even didn't even get time to listen to Sam's, but it makes the narrowing of things I want to bring up in this episode very difficult, because that set of people were all so good. The interviews were so good. There were, when we do an interview, and we usually comment on it at the time, oh, that's going to be a quote, or whatever. Like, we say things like that a lot, but it's like every one of these has multiple things that we would want to comment on, and we can't, for this episode, we won't have time. So it's very difficult to narrow.
Yeah, for sure. And for folks, go ahead and go back and listen to them. You can on the web, if you didn't, for whatever reason, if you're a new listener, if you go to the website, devgameclub.com, there's a what we've played, and it goes in reverse order of the games that we've played. So what we most recently played is on top, and you'll just you scroll down, you just see bonus interview with, under games, and all of those from this year will be in the first, whatever, 10 games or so in that list at time of recording. So
yeah,
you can just kind of scroll around and find their episodes that way. Get the number if you want to download it, or you can do the same thing scrolling through your whatever player you use as well, I suppose. So easy enough to find them. But yeah, let's get started. I'm we're kind of using the loose format, which is where we just kind of like pick things out to talk about. I insert some audio, and we discuss it a little bit and what it meant. So I'm going to let you go first, and then I'll see if I want to go somewhere different or just kind of stay in the same vein for a while.
Yeah. And I'm gonna I'm gonna steal one that I think I'm pretty confident we both would have, and it's an easy one to start with because it is, for me at least, was a really memorable one, and you definitely should listen to the whole interview to get the full context. But Jordan's section about caricature, and especially him sketching people in the airport, and just because of his own graphic memoir, and just the work that he was doing in his journals and the stuff, we obviously brought up rotoscoping and various topics there. You might mention some of those, but specifically when we get to caricature, and he has a great tidbit about his dad as well, there's a section there. And then how it even applies to the importance of good feedback in games in general, and how much we learn from caricature.
Your question was originally about caricaturing, and I think there's actually a link here because what I was doing, as a caricaturist, before I started programming, was to try to find a way to capture a likeness, and this was, it's like a fairground where people would come and they'd pay $5 and sit down, and I would try to draw a caricature that they would take home and be happy so that their friends and family would say, "Oh yeah, man, that really looks like you." Mm-hmm. Like that was the goal, to have a drawing that, even though it's like very simple and just a few lines, that the people who know the person would say, "Absolutely, you caught him." I sort of came back to that recently with Replay, with this graphic novel, because there I drew all the the characters from my own life story. So of course, my dad, my brother, my colleagues at Broderbund, that I was, because I described the making of Prince of Persia and The Last Express, and it's really it's a multi-generational story in which I had to draw the people that I know best, at various stages of their life. So it was really important to me that they be recognizable, even though for a reader it might be, you see a guy, okay, you accept that he's my dad, but I really wanted, like, everybody who knows my dad to look at that and laugh and say, yeah, that's totally him. That, his gestures, the way that he puts on his glasses when he wants to look at something closely. And I think to do that kind of, caricature or to do rotoscoping for a game, like, you have to really sort of find the essence of how somebody expresses their character, in movement. And that's very individual, because it's easy to draw somebody correctly. And, these days, like with the tools that we have, it's so easy to say, give me a run cycle, give me, a character that jumps and climbs. And you can also get stunt people who will do that perfectly with total efficiency. But it's the inefficiency, and it's the individual things that people do that nobody else does that make them recognizable. So that's kind of, for me, that's part of the magic of rotoscoping, is that it captures the quirks that you wouldn't think of, even if you're a really good trained artist or animator. When you look at like an actual person doing it, there's always something that surprises you.
Yep, you're definitely stealing one from me there. That was totally on my list. I was like, oh man, it's so key to his whole thing. but it's also really, and I think I'll actually pair it with another thing of his. There was that whole thing started off with his sort of grandiose goals that he had for himself.
About quality and
quality, and he's like, like 8 years old, and he's like, I'll never really be able to, I can't really compete with Hitchcock, so I'm gonna have to find something else. And along came this Apple II at that time, where it's like, oh, this is kind of new. Yeah, I could probably keep up with this, But that soon transitioned to a discussion of, and this is where I'll probably take the clip from, of going to rotoscoping, because he could also see like his quality wasn't there. So it's like the opposite end of that. It's like later he was choosing rotoscoping and caricature, right, as a kind of a shorthand there, to achieve a certain effect. But originally it was, I can't achieve the effects I want, right? So I'm going to go to rotoscoping. And so I'll put that clip in here.
Well, I mean, it was really kind of an improvisation out of necessity. The fact that I could, that I'd done comics and that I kind of knew how to draw, at the, 13-year-old level was really useful for me in making my first games, because in those days, programmers, we did all of our own art and animation as well, along with sound design, or, what passed for sound design. So, in doing the graphics for my early games, I was able to use my drawing, skills, such as they were, to try to make the games look better. But when it came to animation, there was a limit to what I could do, and it was with my first published game, Karateka, that I had the idea of doing a game that would have fairly large, well animated characters on the screen. Not just little triangles, like the spaceship and asteroids, with a sort of abstract pixel graphics, but to really try to have a human character that would look human and that would move like a person. But when I tried to animate these characters, the animation just didn't look as smooth and as fluid and as lifelike as I wanted it to. So the solution that I found was rotoscoping. It was to film an actor, or actually my mom's karate teacher, with a Super 8 camera, doing all of the punches and kicks and moves, and then I filmed my dad running and climbing the cliff, actually climbing up onto the hood of our family car, in front, in the woods in front of our house. And rotoscoping is basically just a fancy word for tracing each frame to get the silhouette of the filmed character, and then reproducing those frames as animation, frame by frame. It's a technique that was used, going back to silent film in the 1920s and 30s, by early animators, and you can't really tell that animation was rotoscoped, but it just kind of gives you like a shortcut to getting the right timing and the right, very human, very specific movements. And so it worked wonderfully for Karateka, and I think it was a big reason that game, made the impact that it did.
Yeah, it's a really good partnership to both points, because, like you said in the preamble, they are basically bookends in a way, right? Of the whole sort of journey for him, and I had that on my list as well, especially the sort of the lead in of the kind of lesson of finding a space that you can own, and then owning it, in the quality sort of topic that he brought up. So that's good.
Yeah, we talked about that a bit in the sort of post talk after his interview, about how he's a guy whose only job on LinkedIn is self-employed, 40 years, like how he has just had a commitment to doing the things he does, which are all in a similar vein. Even his non-game work are in similar areas. And, we kind of talked about, he's just had a vision for his life that has been consistent since he was 10 or 12 or whatever it was, so cool and interesting guy. And kind of humbling to have some, talk with somebody who had that kind of vision for themselves.
Very unique in our medium, in our industry. Yeah. Like very, very different from anyone else.
Yeah, for sure. Well, who do you want to go to next?
I'm looking at my list, which again is quite long. But because I can only pick one. I was trying to find one that partnered well with that one, but I will at least stay with people who live in the south of France right now.
Sure, that's a tie-in. Yeah,
going with Michel, and there's various ones I'd love to mention here, but the one I'm going to pick above all else, which you probably won't be, no pun intended, surprised by, is the topic we had. I think we talked about it in two different sections, but the main one about Midway, about his goal and their goal to make, and we're talking about Beyond Good and Evil, of course, and make a game that is constantly surprising you. Yeah. And how both hard that is to do, but how, kind of pure of a goal that was for them. And then I think, both chimed in on how successful it was and surprising it was, even us playing it, whatever, decades later. And it's still surprising me, so that whole section about him talking about that goal was great to hear.
Oh, I think the space games like Elite or I don't remember. Yes, or Star Glider 2, or those games from Argonaut. This game from Argonaut. Who were the guys who worked later on Star Fox? It was again the big thing I talked about earlier, about the magic you could get from a computer, like those 3D world you could enter into, like in Tron the movie. I think that's exactly the same thing. It's this idea of okay, I can create a world. I'm going to dive into this world. I will discover planets and things like that. And yes, this was driving I had those, I remember on my Atari playing those 2D games with wireframe 3D graphics. But then what you can imagine from that is just huge, and I wanted to leave this again, into my own game, this feeling that you can travel and discover, talk with, aliens, or discover things, and this idea that you don't really know what are the boundaries of the world you're into. It's not just on the physical side, but also on the kind of gameplay you can, you can have vehicles or characters you can meet and things you can do. I like this idea that it's a bit blurry and you have a game, but you don't exactly know how far you're going to go. With the different gameplays and the experience you will live. It was I like this idea of keeping this mysterious, and I think at some point it's things that are, it is my own, of course, idea, but I think this is also driving games like Metal Gear Solid, or some games from Hideo Kojima or Mr. Miyamoto, sorry, because at some point, when it's interesting as a player, you have the feeling when you play some games that you have almost understood the main gameplays and things that are going to happen, and it's very interesting to go back in the era where you were just a kid and you are not too technical and maybe not able to really understand the boundaries of the game, and the fact that at some point you have seen everything and now it's just about finishing things or repeating the same task over and over. It's just more difficult. So I really love this idea that some games are going to surprise you, like the same incredible moment when you have the horse in Ocarina of Time, where it's completely changing the perception of the game. But of course, you could because it was into the introduction, you knew you would play this animal, the horse. But all these kind of ideas that you are going to maybe dive into lakes or whatever, but you don't exactly know what is going to be the next power, the next thing, the next world, and this mystery around the game, and this feeling of living into a kind of dream or something like that is really something that drove me and into some into the directions with Beyond Good and Evil.
Yeah, I really love that too. And I remember in the moment you coming back and I was like, yeah, I kind of know what this game is. I mean, they'll find some way to transition me to the moon, and then I'll do this kind of same sort of stuff on the moon.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you're going to take your boat and make it into a plane and then a spaceship. You're just going to keep adding to your boat until you can do all these crazy things. And it was truly a surprising kind of moment. It definitely makes me reflect on something Alex Garden said of Relic and Homeworld fame. And there were a lot of good things in there, so I may come back to Alex. But it was actually towards the end of our conversation, and he was talking a little bit about Homeworld 2 and the game that they had envisioned it to be. And especially as people who are more charting our own paths right now as much as we can in the industry that we currently have. He talked about how, they had this idea for Homeworld 2 and what it was going to be. It was a really strong and unusual idea, like Homeworld had been. And he basically came back to say, you know what, when it comes down to it, those other people don't know your stuff. They don't know your audience. So just follow your own vision.
Mm-hmm.
So right after we shipped Homeworld, for a lot of reasons, we had an instinct that we had to go build something right away to build on the success of it. And my vision, I was obviously a very novice at everything, novice designer, novice engineer, novice executive, but my vision was, let's take all the tech and let's double down on multiplayer. Let's just keep the story the same. Let's release something in 6 months that's a 100% focused multiplayer. Let's build the richest, deepest end player multiplayer version of Homeworld. We called it Team Homeworld, and you were going to be able to play as a strategist or as a fighter pilot or a frigate pilot. In like you could fly an individual ship, or you could command the whole squadron, and people would work collaboratively together. And ships that are piloted by people would be better than ones that were piloted by AI. Okay, so that was the thing. Team Homeworld.
Sounds good.
And it was going to be totally seminal. And one of the executives at Sierra, Scott had left at this time, said to me, no, you're wrong. You don't understand. You have to redo it from scratch. And so, not knowing any better, we listened to him, and it led to a catastrophe of consequences. And so, I guess my takeaway from this is trust your judgment. Trust your vision. Don't be afraid to tell people that you're going to do something, even if they feel differently, because at the end of the day, it's your vision, not theirs.
That was a very good segue into to Alex.
Yep, thank you.
I definitely had that same one. It was probably my top one for him too. So I'm glad you brought that one up. And yeah, I think I can kind of read it in between the lines of your preamble to that one too, because we're definitely in our day job a little bit in that space of grappling with that challenge, right? How do you stick with it?
It's a hard thing. I mean, it does. That connects for me with Michel and with Jordan in terms of like, the vision that they had for a game or a life in creativity, but also just like, there's like these realities we face as, in an industry which requires a lot of people and therefore a lot of money to make stuff that, it just, it means that more people have say. So, and sometimes not, sometimes the people who have the money are not the people who have the best say, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, not a perfect segue, but sticking with Alex, let's see, there was not a specific, I do want to just as a side comment on all of these, I did want to mention a theme that I noticed listening to them all, again, except for Sam's, unfortunately, but I'm pretty sure the theme was in there too, that, there was, I think just through the sheer chance of the randomness of the chaos of the universe, there was a pretty consistent theme through all of them this year or last year of them not knowing that something was going to be hard. They just did it.
That's true.
I almost all of them mentioned that.
Yeah.
Obviously Tony came in late in that production, so he kind of came onto a team and was handed something that was already chosen to be hard, and and had some failure and success at that in Trespasser. But everyone else like kind of admitted that they didn't really realize what they were trying to do. They just did it, and then it ended up being what it was. So that I thought that was an interesting side theme. So not a particular pull quote there, but I wanted to mention that theme. But for Alex, there's a lot that interview is very good, by the way. So people really need to listen to all of these fully. But that one, he's a very entertaining fellow. But just because it tickles me so much, I really would love to clip out the moment that they pitched. I guess it was the second meeting they had with the Sierra executives.
Yep.
Where they showed the demo and what happened there.
We'll take a risk on you. We're going to fund you for a prototype. We'll give you $100,000, 3 checks, $50,000, $25,000, $25,000. You got 3 months to put something together. And if you do, we'll talk about a deal. So one of the most incredible moments of my life.
Wow.
And off we went. So I like to joke that Homeworld was a 50,000 line demo with a 1,000,000 line patch on top of it. None of us had any idea what we were doing. So we wrote this demo and we went down to Sierra and they said you have to do a PowerPoint presentation, which I'd never done before. And they said, and we'd done this demo that was like a multiplayer 2-person head-to-head Homeworld.
Oh, it was multiplayer first.
Well, because we didn't have time to write any AI, so we wrote a networking layer into this multiplayer. So we rolled these 2 like CRT televisions into the room on big AV carts. And we walk in there, we're the first meeting of the day, and everyone's in a shit mood. And it was like Jane Jensen, like Al Lowe, Roberta Williams, Ken Williams, Scott Lynch. Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. And so we tried to do this PowerPoint presentation, and I still to this day don't know what happened, but literally the slides came up in the wrong order. So like it was a disaster. And Scott's looking at me like, oh, for crying out loud, right? So then he goes, whatever, just show us the game. So we open the game, and it looks shitty, right? Because it looks like a static bitmap on both screens, and then people are just like, oh my God, what the hell is this crap? And then we move the camera. And the moment we moved the camera, I will never forget this. Everyone like sat up out of their seats and leaned forward. Oh. And by the end and we played one match, and it was just like, I think like 3 units and really basic. And we played one match. And by the end of it, everyone in the room was out of their chairs going, yeah, get up! And all this ranting and raving. And we finished and we left. And as we were walking out of the room, I heard Ken Williams, right, founder of Sierra. I heard him say to Scott, well, this isn't going to be a difficult decision.
Yeah, that is a perfect partner piece. That was one that I was looking at like, oh, I could maybe come back around to this because of that. Because it was, the funny thing with that meeting was it was like, I'll just play the clip, but it's like Al Lowe and Ken Williams, it's other developers, right? And of course, they looked at it and were like,
Roberta was there too, I think.
Yeah, Roberta was there too. Yeah. And Jane Jensen. And it's like, oh, we get it. And I think they heard, he heard after they left the meeting, Ken Williams saying, and that's probably just been played, like, well, this will be easy, like an easy one to sign. And that is, that was, I was like, oh man, I'm so glad you went there. Cause I was thinking, sometimes you do get the right person to talk to, or the right people in that case.
Let's see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing I love about that clip and that section that we talked about, and I think it's in it, so I guess you will have just heard it, is that it mirrors the player's experience as well, which is such a rare story to get, I think, from a developer because we talked about it in, unbeknownst to us at the time when we talked about it in the series of like that first moment you move the camera, being such a revelation for the player, not knowing that actually that occurred in the pitch as well, and that same revelation was what kind of put them over the edge. So it's such a fascinating, kind of like time capsule story. So
yeah, no, that's a good one, for sure. And I had that one in my notes as well. And it just says, getting the deal from Sierra. The other thing that this is kind of picking up on your other theme is like we didn't know it was going to be hard. One of the hard things that came up at least a couple of times was when and what to cut. And Sam Lake referred to basically the group of directors getting together after everybody kind of shoved in what they wanted this game to be, and having built this open world thing, and kind of drifted and was more post-apocalyptic and et cetera for Alan Wake. All the directors got together to figure out what the actual game was going to be, and they called it the sauna crew because they were going to get in a room, lock themselves in, and just take the heat to figure out the game.
From the writing perspective, trying to match what we were talking about, so there ended up being quite a few story versions of Alan Wake as we went along, trying to find, okay, maybe we can make it work this way. Okay, that would mean this kind of a story, and yeah, no, that's not that doesn't work, and we haven't figured this out. Ideas like day and night, dynamic day and night cycle, and gather resources during daytime and then defend against the forces of darkness during nighttime. And kind of what I felt sorry along the way, that to match it with story, it started to slide a bit more into post-apocalyptic scenario where there are survivors and everybody is very aware of the, forces of darkness threatening us. And I felt that we are losing something like the idyllic small town setting was kind of drifting away, and we went. It didn't feel like we were getting any closer to really nailing it down, and bit of despairing along the way until we finally kind of decided that okay, now we just need to figure it out. Like we can't be spending any more time. And in a very kind of Finnish culture way, we gathered together all the leads and directors of the project, and we called it the sauna group. And sauna group because of the idea that we'll just go into a room and we'll lock ourselves in, and we'll go through all the different aspects of the game, and we just kind of take the heat and we'll figure it out together what this game really, really is. And we are not coming out before we do. That kind of a mental approach to it. Because we had been drifting and there had been all kinds of tests and it was not bringing us closer. So then we set out to make some hard decisions, and the turning point, very early big decision was that we are not doing a free roaming open world after all, that we will create a linear experience out of this. And then everything just clicked into place.
Yeah, and I do remember that story for sure, and it is funny because there were a couple good stories about cutting in various places in these interviews. So it's funny how these themes surface, and I'm sure they surface in all of our interviews to some degree. But it was nice to have some continuity there.
Yeah, it's something we talk about all the time, is that you have to put the constraints on yourself, and so that's kind of a different way of putting on the constraint. Is like, okay, well, we're not going to put on the constraints to begin with. Let's be really open. They were in a position where they could be. And then later, now we've seen what the whole space could be. we're actually going to take the pieces out that fit together and make sense.
Yeah.
And it turns something negative, which is like, this is impossible for us to build, into a positive, and kind of making the team relieved, which was kind of the follow-up conversation we had with Sam about that. And it was so recognizable of like, yeah, sometimes the whole team knows this is never going to happen the way it's going. And then you go in and make some surgical cuts, and it's like, oh, phew, thank God, and the team actually comes out of that breathing a little easier and feeling a little better about what's going to result. So it's one of those things that happens.
Yeah. I mean, shifting gears completely for me, and again, hopefully you have maybe another Sam one in there to cover me on that, but shifting gears to Tony, obviously I know Tony, we're friends and worked together before, and it was a delight to talk to him, and I also was really appreciative that we got to talk to him from a QA perspective, because he's also a great designer and writer, these days, and now professor, but there's so many that we won't clip here, but so many great and also some semi-tragic QA stories, because I think for me, especially personally coming from QA, there's always those stories of OT and working from a copy room and, all those sorts of things that, especially early in your career, you think are sort of like badges of honor, but, but in the end are really just like not good practices. So sort of like that sort of like weird trip down memory lane, stories of clay islands, and things like that weren't enough to clip out. But to be honest, for Tony, I wanted to kind of use it as a plug, especially because of our charity event that the community is putting together coming up. Because also unbeknownst to me going into this, I didn't actually realize that Tony had this game preservation focus in his life right now. And the white paper that he was writing, I think, is probably now published, which I haven't actually looked for if it is recently. And how important it is. And, he wasn't claiming that he has all the answers, but it sounds like he's trying to at least help spark some of the good debate about how to get some best practices in place.
So I'm not in the Video Game History Foundation. I've chatted with those folks over there, especially Phil Salvador and Frank Cifaldi a lot, mostly GDC.
Right. I meant I wanted to get to your paper.
Yes, I have a white paper coming out about, hey, maybe we should all get together and figure out some best practices for how to preserve our game history and make sure it is preserved for the future. Make sure games are, because guess what? Video games, computer games, arcade games, handheld games, these are part of our modern culture. And they're an important aspect of how we communicate, how we express ourselves, and they deserve to be studied and understood. And part of that is being able to play and research and understand these games. And so I wrote up a charter on preservation of digital game heritage, as I called it, taking after UNESCO, the United Nations guidelines on preservation of heritage materials. And it'll be published coming up this, I believe, in December. It was a presentation based on a presentation I gave at the MAD conference, which is the Media, Arts, and Design Conference, an online conference held between Drexel University and University of Krems, an Austrian university. And so it was a worldwide conference all held on Zoom, which is pretty cool. And so, yeah, my conference proceedings will be published coming up in December. So excited about that. Hopefully it'll be enough. Not that I necessarily know all the guidelines that we need to do to preserve our future, but it's a starting point, and it's meant to spark a conversation and hopefully encourage a culture or a community of practice around all these different preservation groups, like the Video Game History Foundation, Software Preservation Society, Game Preservation Society over in Japan, like all these the the Internet Archive, all these different groups, maybe we should talk together and figure out what are some best practices. Actually, there is a symposium coming up that I'll be attending later this month at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. So I'm going to be talking to some folks about my paper there.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, there was one question in our email. We don't usually do questions on the year-end takeaways, but there was one, was actually two-part questions from Biostats about video game preservation and how it applies to us, and in reaction to the recent Discord Game Club that I put out. And I didn't put it in our plan for tonight just because I don't think you've had a chance to listen to that interview yet.
No, I do need to listen to those still,
so
and I will, listeners.
I'll make sure to like ping you this week and say, make sure you listen to episode whatever, and give you the link so that you're prepared to talk about that question. Not that I think you need to listen to for most of it to listen to the interview specifically for the questions he's asking, but it's still worthwhile to do so. Yeah, that was it's a good focus for sure. I mean, it's a really hard part of our industry, in terms of like, well, these big companies own the IPs and they own the work, right? And so they get to make the decisions. It's a whole thing. The funny thing is, I thought you were going to go a different direction with Tony. So I'm actually going to go to my Tony one next to set up the one after that for me. Maybe I'll do two in a row because they tie together. And the one I actually mentioned in the meeting earlier, because I just listened to this episode, was adjusting the plants.
I have it on my list. Yeah.
It was one of those things that I picked up, and he had listened to the episode, so he knew, the things that we had picked out. And one of the things I had said is like, all the plants are like floating, not all the plants, but there's a lot of places where the plants are above the ground, inserted into the ground, and I was like speculating as the technical reasons why that might be. And it turned out to be just a tools problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of other last minute changes. You guys had mentioned like a lot of the plants were misaligned, and you're like, well, maybe they just had integer math or something like that. Like, no, what happened was we used 3D Studio Max as the level editor. But the 3D Studio Max kind of maxes out at like 5,000 objects at the time. And we had tens and tens of thousands of objects in every level. So it got to the point, like, all the plants were placed at the right spots. And then what would happen is an adjustment had to be made to the terrain. And for an artist to go in and set all the plants back, well, every time you click on something, it would take 30 seconds for it to respond because it's dealing with all these objects in a world that it was never built for. So a lot of times they're like, well, it's going to take too long to fix. We're just not going to fix that. So yeah, there ended up being a lot of floating plants. Trust me, I bugged them.
So they were using 3ds Max. 3ds Max did not handle large numbers of objects, so if they had to adjust the terrain for reasons, probably something more important than where the plants were, because the plants were not, in most cases, something you could even collide with, they just were like, well, we have to fix the terrain, probably because a dinosaur can't chase you when we want it to. So we're just going to do that, but we can't adjust the plants because we'd have to do them one at a time, and each one takes 30 seconds, and there's 10,000. And that was a really cool, like, that's a game developer problem right there, especially at that time.
And how important the tools came up in quite a few of the interviews. This is another theme too, right?
Yep.
Especially in Michel's, and
that's where I was going next.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, but in Tony, before you go there, in Tony's case, it's just like it's a great, I think, hopefully a great example for listeners of how important tool decisions can be to a game's success or failure, and oftentimes you make those decisions very early, and oftentimes you can't change them.
Yeah.
If you want to.
Not only can you not change them, you can't predict the problems you're going to have, because in that, in particular, in that case, of course, they didn't know how much data they were going to have, and they didn't know that 3ds Max wouldn't be able to handle it. Right. I mean, they did some tests. They made probably a small test area, whatever. And then we're like, oh yeah, this seems like this will work. We've got a pipeline. Okay, good. Check. we can enter production, and then at the end of production, you're like, oh man, those idiots in pre-production didn't know. Yeah, what it takes me to with Michel is that they went a totally different way that just blew our minds, especially in the time of the Jade engine, which is, say, for Beyond Good and Evil. Everything was done in the game. They did everything with tools that they wrote and that ran alongside the game. Everything, like
modeling
coordinates, modeling,
UVing,
UVing. Oh my God. And like our minds were just
facial animation. You mentioned.
Yeah. Facial animation, just everything, everything. And we couldn't think, and it was like, we were both like, that can't be what? So here's that quote now.
Team was about 35 people with everybody like porting the game, making the tools, artists.
Wow.
It was like 35 people, or no more. And it's just crazy just hearing that.
That's crazy.
That is insane. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's crazy. You can't imagine the amount of tools. Imagine that the whole 3D was done into the tool. Even the modeling, skinning, animation, everything was done into the main tool. Like the tool we had, we didn't use the 3ds Max or 3D Studio or whatever. Everything was.
Oh my gosh! Are you serious?
Yeah, I think it would be crazy to do something to make those tools, make something presenting those tools, because I have not seen even tools from today. I have not seen tools where you could do everything from scratch into the same tool. So UV mapping, animations, cinematics, everything was done into the main tool.
And just a team of 35 people. That's
crazy. And the tool was incredible. It was stable. It was optimized. The coding, of course, was done. All the script was done all the coding was done into the engine with a dynamic coding system that was compiled in C for the cooking, for the optimization on the PlayStation. But it was you could make your game from scratch, write everything. Without any external tool, even for the code, for the modeling, animation, everything. The morphing for the faces, all the multimorph things, blend shapes for the faces, everything. It was sorry, I'm back. Yeah, the tool was incredible. As an example, you could change the ground in real time and have the collision modified, and the collision of the character was computed while you were playing. So it's just crazy because the tool was also running, you could modify things on the fly while you were just playing. So it was really powerful, and we used the same kind of powerful tools for Rayman Origin and Rayman Legends. Tools where you can do everything into the engine.
But it's not the same tool.
It's not the same, but it's the same
the same approach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because it was so powerful for the team, for a small team, being able, to make everything like that was really
makes you very agile.
Yeah. It was incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, like, especially, definitely in that day and age, for sure. And I think he mentioned multiple times it's a team of 35, so it made them small, made them more efficient, to be able to do it that way. So there's definitely some logical. I mean, I guess you can see how they got there.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was also the way he was used to working, when he was much smaller teams, and at times when there weren't really tools for the dedicated things you needed to do.
Right. It was kind of like in this weird sweet spot of the industry and the medium as it's progressed. And he talked about early in the interview too about which was on my list, and I don't think we need to pull quote, but you definitely should listen to his sort of journey to meet the Ubisoft team, which is just like a mind-blowing story. But like it's a sort of a reminder that every sort of region has its game development history. And for France, right, Ubisoft being in that early phase, everyone's influencing each other, but still, there's a lot of, oftentimes there's a sense of community around certain regions, right? Like whatever, the Bay Area, Seattle, each area has kind of like, East Coast for you, right? Like there's sort of a sensibility to
Austin versus Dallas. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Austin versus Dallas is a great example, right? If for those who are kind of like up on that stuff, like look it up, but it's very interesting kind of cultural differences and the way that things are built. And then, it felt like when Michel was talking about that, that's just how they had been doing things, like through the progress of creating Ubisoft and the influence he had when he joined and all that kind of stuff. And so, to us, it was like, unfathomable that's how they did it. But I think, like you said, to him, that was just what they do, and then you think today, like how powerful something like Unreal is, and it does so many different things, but still it doesn't do modeling, right. or whatever. It's like, we're still not there.
Think of our people who work in, character and in animation, all of that would have been in their tool. But for us, it's like, maybe some kind of sculpting thing, and then bringing it into Blender, and then to do texturing and UVing, and then you've got to rig it, and that's maybe in Maya, and then you're going to animate it, maybe also in Maya. It's just like step
before you're even Unreal,
before you've even got it to Unreal. Yeah, because you don't really. How the data is actually managed is complicated, but fundamentally, it's like you have all this work you do in other programs you're spending a lot of money on. And to be fair, they spent a lot of money on those, but they were their tools. And when things didn't work, they knew what to do, right? That was kind of the counterpoint to the using 3ds Max is like, well, when it takes 30 seconds to move a plant, what do you do about it?
Yeah.
Nothing. There's nothing. You don't have source. What are you going to do? Like, you can't make it faster. And so you're just kind of stuck, So.
Right. Yeah. Because you don't have that. Yeah. So there's, the pros and cons of it, but also you have to build. I think the reason it boggled our mind is you have to build your own tools to do all that. And I also just remembered Alex told a story that, again, we don't need to pull out, but just to connect it, if you listen to that one, he told a story of early on when he was helping some friends fix a problem they had with the sprites.
Oh, right. Yeah. Their sprites were munged badly.
Yeah. And in that case, they got themselves into a corner and chose to, programmatically fix it. And that's why they had him come in and help. But it's like for the plans, it's like your only solution at that point maybe was to somehow write a way to kind of write all that. But
to do it in game, maybe, at that point.
Something. But it's again, you're shipping.
It was when they were shipping. Yeah. And they couldn't. Yeah.
You can't
just like, I'm going to do this whole feature to support something. We want to go golden tomorrow.
Yeah.
So,
right. It is. It's a whole new feature or system. And
it becomes a whole thing. Well, I think I just did 2 in a row. So I want to throw and give you room for one more, wherever it comes from. And then I have one more I want to take from Sam Lake.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. Good to end with Sam there again, because I won't have another one. I think if I scan through them, because we hit a lot of the good ones so far that I wanted to do, but it came in kind of 2 places. It actually more than 2 places, but with Alex, the one about him coming to sort of the revelation about what Homeworld needed to be. And I don't know if I don't want to on the fly this for you, because it's actually a 2-parter in a way, because he talks about the initial inspiration.
Yep.
But then he also later tells the story about what it meant to him and how it ended up being sort of a post-mortem sort of for him of like what it actually meant. And both of those had a really big resonance to me, because a lot of times my responsibility is the vision side of things. And it's a very tricky tricky thing.
Literally, I was struck by a bolt of lightning. I had this flash of inspiration, and I was thinking about Ptolemy's theory of the universe. It's a crystal sphere surrounding Earth, and the stars are pasted to the inside of the sphere. And inside the realm of the sphere is the realm of man, and outside of the realm of the sphere is the realm of God. And it struck me that the surface of a sphere is a 2D surface, and you could use the mouse to navigate a camera, which was always pointing at the center of the sphere, on the exterior of the sphere using up, down, and left and right, and it would be pretty cool. And you could use the mouse wheel to control the size of the sphere. And if there was a selection of focus within the sphere, that would be like a groundbreaking UI paradigm. No one had done anything like that before. And then it occurred to me that like if you put trails behind the ships, that would give you a temporal reference of their travel over time. And it looked like a huge ball of spaghetti floating in zero G in my mind. And actually the working title of Homeworld was Spaghetti Ball for a while until we came up with a new title for it. So I stopped and I said like, whoa, like this is a thing. And I was kind of like obsessed with the idea, but I didn't know where to go with it, you know? So I was finaling a game at work at the time. And then I went to EA and I was at Triple Play and I was working at Triple Play and I was sleeping under my desk finaling Triple Play. And literally like it was like, 24 hours a day at work. And I think I had gone home one morning and my alarm clock radio went off and it was on a classical station and it was playing Adagio for strings in G minor in a choral arrangement by Barber. And it just a second lightning bolt. It said, holy crap, this is the theme song for the game. And it, maybe it doesn't seem so unusual now, but at the time, best in class for game audio was like, uncha, 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 boom, boom. Like there was no notion that there could be delicacy or nuance. And so I thought, well, this is really cool. So then it started coming together for me. I'm like, this is a story like Battlestar Galactica of a disenfranchised people finding their birthright, traveling across the galaxy, facing adversity. And it's a sad story. And it's a haunting story. It's not doom. We're not going to jam it down your throat. We're gonna make your heart ache. And the conflict isn't going to be the point of the game. It's just something that you have to manage, and we're going to try and highlight, the loss and the pain that goes along with it. And I thought that was a really cool way of telling a story. And there wasn't that the kind of nuance just didn't exist in gaming at the time. It just wasn't part of the storytelling zeitgeist. Well, so look, maybe you guys have a different origin story than I do. You sound very cool. I was not very cool as a kid, and I came from a pretty rough family background. Didn't have a lot of support there. We moved a lot, and I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I felt really disenfranchised. I didn't feel part of a community. I didn't feel like I related to my peers, and maybe that's why I enjoyed working with computers so much. And I felt, as a computer-centric science fiction nerd without a lot of friends at the time, as you can imagine, it wasn't like a super welcoming, day-to-day existence, right?
Oh, I'll try to imagine that.
Yeah, give it a shot. See if you can.
I think Brett's pretty much
while you stroke your neck beard.
His language.
Yeah, exactly. So, but here's the thing. Deep down inside, it's the dream of every person like that to believe that you can apply yourself and you can overcome those beginnings and you can become not just successful and popular, but you can actually find a place in the world. And in fact, maybe, you could realize that it wasn't you, actually, it was everybody else. And it just took some time for the world to realize that. And Homeworld, I directed the game, right? So I should know this, but I didn't know this at the time. Homeworld was my origin story, right? Disenfranchised people who've had everything taken from them, stripped from their birthright. They're not even aware that that's the case, but there's this latent greatness hiding that one day they inadvertently stumble across, and they go off on this journey that requires unbelievable bravery, facing impossible odds, set against by the entire universe who's trying to stop them from achieving their goal, but they persevere. And it is a sad journey. It's not a heroic journey. It's a sad journey, and it's a lonely journey, and it has tremendous suffering and pain and hardship and sacrifice. But at the end of that, you discover there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And actually, not only have you found a happy ending, but actually you found that all along you were in the right, and you do belong. And there's something really special and valuable about the effort that you've made, and it all feels like it's worth it in the end. And I think that inadvertently, Homeworld was the Breakfast Club of our gaming generation. It was this redemption story about being an outsider and a loner and an individual. And it was a way for you to mourn that process. And I think that's why it hit people so hard, honestly, the people who loved it.
Yeah, I love those stories. And in particular, when he was talking about his, sort of growing up a nerd, is more or less what he was saying is like, he was talking about overcoming shortcomings and finding his place in the world, and that you will. And that turned out to be the story of Homeworld. And you'll have just heard that, I imagine. I was hard connecting with all of that. I was like, and it's funny because that unification of player, and in this case designer, but also player Alex, with his story, actually was a really good segue to my other Sam Lake one. So well done. And in Sam's case, he talked a lot about, it was one of the things we talked about with him because it's not something we've cracked, and it's not the sort of games we typically make, where there's a lot of story, really integrated well into the play, and they make story games, but they're action games at the same time. And what he talked about was, he used the example, and I'm not sure if this will be in the clip or not, so I'm just going to set it up a little bit. He was like, often you'll have in a story about a character who comes up against the supernatural or something science fiction-y, they'll have a long period where they are denying it. And, that can't be true. That's not the way the world is. And he said the really important thing is to, as quickly as possible, get the main character and the player's motivations in alignment so that the player feels like they're connected with that character, and that the character wants to do what the player wants to do. So here's that clip.
Creating an action game and a story into an action game, obviously the story needs to support the conflict and the action, and so that's one way to look at it, and one starting point for it. The other thing is, strong, interesting lead character, but even that's a bit of a delicate thing. Like what I often find from the team side, people have this ambition of creating an arc for the main character from the sense that, well, if there is a supernatural element, like with Alan Wake as an example, that if this was a film or if this was a book, we would spend a long time in the state of denying and questioning, and not kind of running away in a sense. But if the core gameplay is that you have a gun and you should be facing these forces, it kind of, to me, means that you need to be pretty clever into building the suggestion of this kind of psychological arc into it. Because what's crucial is that the state of mind and the drive of the main character needs to be as close as possible to what the player wants to do, and whenever we drift further away between these two, the more the player starts to feel that the main character they are supposed to play is stupid. And so that's a delicate thing, like especially the early parts of the game to manage that.
Yeah, there's so, as you're reminding me of these sections of the Sam Lake interview, there were so many. I'm so happy that we got to have him on because, obviously we play games with story in them. But he's one of the few out there right now. Maybe you could throw Kojima in there, but I think.
Yeah, and we talked about Kojima a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. It rings a bell. But there's other elements of the Kojima side of it that are weird, I think, for me, even though I'm a big fan, as
Yeah.
everyone knows, and we did play Metal Gear, so go back and listen to those. But Sam specifically, like, there aren't many, this might be overblowing it, but there aren't many Sams in our industry who are so good at talking about the marriage of story and gameplay and have actually made games that have maybe not fully cracked the nut, but gotten the closest, because so many times, and we actually talked about this with Michel, as I remember too, because that was one of their goals, right? To really make sure they were making a story game, and he hit that many times. But the marriage of those two things is 90% of the time off, but I feel like Sam's games and his team's games as a team effort, like they have really gotten, if people I think about today, a company that has, like you said, makes story games, but does them well and feels fully integrated, Control as an example of a recent one.
Right.
Yeah.
Or Alan Wake too.
Yeah. And that one I haven't played yet, but I've heard that it even ratchets all of that up even more.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was, it's so clearly his big focus in like talking about Jordan having like his goals in life, clearly Sam's are there as well. Right. I mean, he jumped in, into the industry to write, I think it was item descriptions for like
right.
unit, things you bought in a shop or something in some early,
like a car game,
racing game. Yeah, some kind of racing game. Like, but like, he since then has been laser focused on like, how do we do these things, to tie story together. I mean, there are plenty of good story games. We're not, what we mean is a story game tied to an action game, that's not, in the types of games that normally the story is throwaway. There was a famous quote from Carmack about how much video games need story. I'm not going to repeat it. It's a little off color. You can go look it up. But that's been the view of a lot of the industry when it comes to action games. And I think for me, the Remedy games, and, especially Alan Wake's and Control really speak to me because they find a way to unify them so closely, and a lot of the themes are there as well, and he even talks later in the interview about how he wants to make sure that the stories in the games are also kind of the story of Remedy. So it's a really, it's like, right. He thinks about it totally, even, we talked a lot about the Champion of Light performance at the Game Awards that year, which at the time was only a couple months prior. So, man, I mean, I just like all these interviews were gold. Listening to him again, I'm like, man, how are we going to top these? These are great. So here we are at the end of a year, sir. You feel older and wiser?
Those things.
I was going to say, how about older?
Yeah. I don't know if I'll ever feel wiser, but we've been through some stuff. So
well, don't worry, Tim. I'll always be enough of a wise guy for both of us.
Fair enough. Yeah. It's been a good year. I think the podcast's been great. The community has been great. Obviously, they're even doing episodes that we're sharing with everyone too. And again, I'm behind a little bit on those, but I know you feel the same way. Can't thank the community enough. Their Discord, especially the community. So and these, like we said, the interviews reminded me how much we've gone through. I still, I think we always reflect on this, and I think it's been pretty much every single year. How many are we at 8 now? Is this
we are about to hit 9. Yeah, we're about to hit 9.
Yeah,
we're about 6 weeks away, I think, from 9 years.
Oh my goodness. What? I don't believe that. But I still, I can't believe it, but I still get so much from, it's a lot of time commitment for us and especially you, but I still get a lot I still learn things, right? Every episode, and especially from the interviews. So that's, I'm coming up on 29 years in the industry. And so I'm thankful that I actually can still learn new things, every week.
Yeah. I mean, you might even say that that making games, is not a lake, but an ocean.
Yeah, I could say that. I really could.
But
on that
note, let's wrap it there. Thanks for joining us for our takeaways. We'll get back to Minecraft next week, and probably at some point a mailbag episode because they have been piling up. We appreciate those. Those are sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. We also love to get your reviews. It's kind of the only way we promote the podcast at all is to have reviews out there that drive people to us. So go ahead, and if you haven't, please do. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, or you can find my co-host twitching at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
There was a kind of natural plug earlier for the Video Game History Foundation benefiting charity event that the Discord folks will be putting on at the end of January here. I believe the dates are the 25th and the 26th. I will correct that in the show notes if I am wrong. There is a Defeating Games for Charity website that you can check out. All of the things. Those guys are great, and they have an interesting lineup coming, and I believe we're part of it. So we will be part of that as well, at least part of that, and I think our Minecraft server will be too. So join us in the Discord as well for all of that and details and lots of interesting conversations. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, the Discord, our merch store, all of the things, including that website for the charity, are by Mark Garcia. Have fun listening to your old interviews this week, and good night.
Good night.